Thank you, Brian. Brian does a very good show on WBRP 107.3. You can hear him, I think, 3 hours in the morning, right? And to show you what kind of a day he has, and many people in radio are kind of the offensive linemen of media. They don't get a lot of accolades, but last night after doing his show, he produced the LSU basketball game. And then this morning he was ready to do another show. And that means lining up the guests and all the things that go with doing a talk show. Some of these national programs that I hear on WRKF, very good national programs, they have 20 or 30 employees. Brian has one and I have one, and we have somebody who fortunately can run the board effectively while we're on the air, but that's pretty much the nature of the beast. And I commend him for a long and successful career that probably will last beyond my years. But I hope to be around for a little longer, and I counted this is the 7th time I've been honored to speak to this group. And for anybody who is discontent with Louisiana, they should be in this room, because we not only have an immense amount of brain power, we have some quality individuals. It should make us feel good about our community, which often takes a bath when it comes to the bad headlines we receive. Those bad headlines make it interesting to cover the news, and I've been doing that for a little while. I go back to 1979 as far as covering governor's elections, and I started covering the legislature on a regular basis in 1983. And I've had the pleasure of talking with 10 governors, and last year we lost 2 of them. But before we get to Buddy Roemer and Edwin Edwards, I do want to note that a guy who almost was governor, Jimmy Fitzmaurice, died between those two. Within 8 weeks, we lost Roemer, Fitzmaurice, and Edwards. And the first 9 years of my life were in New Orleans, and I went to St. Dominic's Church on occasion. That's where I was baptized. And one of the parishioners was none other than Jimmy Fitzmaurice. And the first local election I can remember was the 1966 New Orleans mayor's race, and he lost by 110 votes to Victor Skiro. And he was elected lieutenant governor, served 2 terms, and if you remember in 1979 on election night in the primary, Edwin Edwards was banned from running for a 3rd consecutive term. Jimmy Fitzmaurice was second to David Treen, and at that point, Fitzmaurice would have defeated Treen rather easily. Republicans were not the preeminent power in the state they are now, and Dave Treen was the first Republican governor since Reconstruction. But they did a recount, and Louis Lambert got in the runoff, and Treen won by, I think, about 8,900 votes. But he could not have defeated Jimmy Fitzmaurice. He beat Louis Lambert. And the irony is that Jimmy Fitzmaurice lost by razor-thin margins, both as governor and mayor of New Orleans. And he, as they say, took it like a man. He was quite a gentleman and lived to be 99 years old. And I think one of the keys to that is to not hold grudges, and he didn't, as far as I know. And believe it or not, Roemer and Edwards really didn't hold that many grudges. They were involved in rough and tumble battles, and there were people they disliked, but they didn't dwell on them. It may explain why they lasted as long as they did. Edwin Edwards made it to 93, and Buddy Roemer to 77. And Roemer fought diabetes for since he was 29 years old. So it was, do the math on that, almost 50 years, 48 years, he had what was juvenile diabetes. And he and I got to know each other on a personal level, other than a professional one, when we both hung out at Books A Million on Perkins Road. And I used to watch him, and he would stab himself in the stomach with a needle. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I do that 4 times a day. I've done it my whole adult life." And he didn't really like Edwin Edwards, and that was reciprocated, but they still hung out together. And if you remember the race from hell in 1991, Buddy Roemer lost to Edwin Edwards and David Duke, about the most ignominious result a sitting governor could have, to lose to Edwin Edwards and David Duke. Now, he could have defeated either one in a runoff, but he didn't make the runoff. And so he is remembered by some as a failed governor, but I think on the whole he did a good job. He switched parties in the middle of his term. He was not a good politician in some ways, because he was a person who switched parties became a Democrat. He was elected as a Democrat, became a Republican, and then he immediately vetoed 2 abortion bills, which sealed his fate. And for a Republican to do that in Louisiana is not a good political move, and he found out the hard way. He did tell me that October 18th was a day he tried to stay away from because it was the birthday of his 2 ex-wives. It was the birthday of Raymond Strother, who he blamed for his defeat in 1991. And it was the birthday of Lee Harvey Oswald, who shot his hero, John Kennedy. And when Romer was a freshman at Harvard, he went off from Shreveport. He was valedictorian, Bossier High School, actually, 1960. He was 16 years old, bright guy. Goes off to Harvard, and he's a Yankees fan. He meets Moose Skowron, the Yankee first baseman, in a bathroom at the airport. And he's so enthused about Moose Skowron, he had been washing his hands, and his dad had given him a Rolex. He finished first in his class. He got a new Rolex for his accomplishment. And he'd taken his watch off to wash his hands. He goes over and shakes hands with Moose Skowron. He comes back, the Rolex is gone. But he was a fascinating fellow, and he, of course, had this long relationship with Edwin Edwards. His father was his commissioner of administration. Romer knew him well. And to tell you a story, and I don't think it's terribly bad, but Edwards, when he was elected, as we know, he was a single guy, and he had his girlfriend, who became his second wife, Candy, living with him in the mansion. But he was, shall we say, surveying his options. And Romer and Edwards were playing in these high-stakes poker games on Perkins Road. Billy Wright was involved with those, another great character from Louisiana. And Romer would leave Books A Million to go to the poker game and come back. And he said, "You'll never believe what happened tonight." He says, Edwin comes in, and he is just reeking of perfume. And he said, "Well, Governor, where you been?" And Edwards goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I can smell it all over you." And he goes, "Well, we got to do something about that." And Romer in those days was a smoker. So Edwards, according to Romer, who I don't think lied, he took off his coat and his shirt, and he said, "Blow that smoke on my chest." Keep doing it, keep doing it. I got to get this smell off me before I go home. And that he did. But Edwin Edwards, as we know, went to jail at 75 for 10 years. And as he said, "They sent me away for life. I came out with a wife." And a wife who was 51 years his junior. And he was a guy who was amazing. And of all the people I've covered, he is the most amazing. And he was governor for 16 years. And I don't think we'll ever have another like him. But he was not a believer in a higher power at the end of his life, and probably hadn't been in a long time. I think at best we would call him an agnostic. But he did a radio show with me shortly after he got out of jail, and he said, "Jim, prison wasn't that tough for me." And I said, "Didn't you pray?" I would pray. I'd pray to get out. I'd pray not to get hurt. I'd pray about it. He goes, "No, I don't pray." He goes, "You never pray?" He goes, "No." He says, "I take that back. I did pray this morning that this would be a very good interview, and my prayers were not answered." But I can recall years earlier, George Carlin, the comic who started his career in Shreveport, by the way, he made a statement that it was unfathomable to have the 10 Commandments in government buildings because he said you got thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit adultery. He said that would create a hostile work environment. But Edwin Edwards, in response at that time, he said, "I disagree." He says, "I believe in 9 of the 10 Commandments." So he lasted until he was 93, almost 94 years old. And I wish he were around because he didn't lose his quickness with his mind at all. And he outlived many of his enemies, including Frank Palazzolo and John Volz. They all passed before he did, and I think he took some satisfaction in that. But as I said, it didn't eat him alive that he had these grudges against people that he was on the wrong side of history on. And we'll get to the congressional bit, which involves redistricting. And right now, the legislature, as we know, is convened, and they're drawing districts not only for Congress, but for themselves, for the Bessie Board, for the Public Service Commission, for the Supreme Court. And all of those are underrepresented by minorities. But when we look at the Capitol, and I started covering it, as I said, in earnest in 1983, at that time, our congressional delegation had 8 members in the House. Today, we have 6. I was looking, in 1924, Louisiana had 10 U.S. House members and Florida had 6. By 1984, Florida had 21 and we still had 10. Now in 2024, we have 6 and they have 30. So you can see Florida has grown in those 40 years, or almost 40 years, 38 years. Florida has grown from 20 seats to 30, so they've grown by a third, and we've gone from 10 to 8, so we've lost a quarter of our population. So something is awry, and our state has veered wildly right as far as how we elect people. In 1983, we had a who's who in Congress. Our senators not only were Russell Long and Bennett Johnston, but we had 8 Congress people, and we had 2 people out who were traditional conservative Republicans, Henson Moore, Bob Livingston. We had 2 who were reliable liberal Democrats, Lindy Boggs and Gillis Long, and then we had 4 who were kind of in the middle, but they were all Democrats. It was Buddy Roemer, it was Billy Tozan, Jerry Huckabee, and John Breaux. And today, we have a delegation, 5 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and 2 U.S. senators who are Republicans. So this sea change has occurred in a generation. In the state capitol, 1991, when Edwards beat Duke, after that election leading up to 95, so we're only talking 27 years ago, there were 86 Democrats in the Louisiana House, and in the Senate, there were 33 of the 39. So there were 119 Democrats in the Louisiana legislature out of 144 seats. Now there are 95 Republicans. And of the Democrats who were there were only 11 white Democrats remaining in the Louisiana legislature. And when I went there, that was all we had, pretty much, a few exceptions. And so white Democrats in the legislature are kind of an endangered species. They're like white tigers and blue whales. There aren't many left, and there may not be any after these districts are redrawn, because they're not in the majority. Most of the Democrats, as we know, white Democrats have become Republicans. And that includes our 2 U.S. senators who were Democrats, John Kennedy and Bill Cassidy. And so we have a new environment, and this governor who is under fire, and we may talk about it, and I'll be pleased to take any questions, and I don't know if I have any answers, but after yesterday's press conference, I thought the governor acquitted himself well, but there are some questions that remain unanswered, and the legislature could impeach him. You know, they've got the votes in the House of Representatives. 68 Republicans only takes a majority, and then it takes 2/3 in the Senate, but 27 of the 39 are Republicans. If they wanted to, they could convict him, throw him out of office. I don't think that's going to happen, and one of the reasons it's not likely to happen is because it would make Billy Nungesser the governor. And not that Billy Nungesser is unqualified, but Jeff Landry certainly doesn't want Billy Nungesser to get a head start on him in the 2023 governor's election, which is next year. And right now, and I promise I'll get to redistricting, and all of this kind of dovetails. Right now we have Schroeder, who's in the race, the treasurer. We have Nungesser, the lieutenant governor, who's running. And we have Jeff Landry, the attorney general, who is running. And there's no Democrat who is announced. And quite possibly, Bill Cassidy could get in. Now, if he gets in, I think some of the Republicans will pull back and run for re-election. The beauty of him running for him is that he doesn't have to give anything up. If he loses, he's still a U.S. senator for another 3 years. And if he wins, he's the governor. And he's got a shot. Now, he would probably be toast if we had a closed primary, but in our open primary system where everybody votes together, he could win because he's a sitting U.S. senator. I would think at the very lowest he would get more than 20% of the votes, which might be enough to make a runoff. And if he got in a runoff with Jeff Landry, he would get almost all the Democratic vote by default. And so Cassidy is well positioned, if he wants to to run for governor, and there are indications that he is at least looking at it. So this will be a fascinating thing that will happen over the next 6 months. But it would probably cause some of those incumbents who are leaving their positions, risking their positions to run for governor, to pull back and not run for governor and seek either re-election to attorney general or lieutenant governor or to treasurer. I think Landry is probably too far in. He's probably going to run, and he will be a formidable candidate should he do so. Now, redistricting, the big controversy seems to be focused upon the congressional lineup. And we have 6 seats. We have 5 seats that are majority white and 1 that is majority black, and we live in a state that is 1/3 African American. So if we were to do the simple math, it would make sense that we would have 4 white majority seats and 2 black majority seats. But how we do that is problematic, and the legislature is unlikely to change things. And one of the reasons is that they have members of Congress who like things the way they are, who are in federal positions, who are in their party, who are coaxing them to keep things as they are. But the governor is a Democrat, and he can veto it, and it would take 2/3 of the legislature to override him. And we saw on the transgender thing that that's tough to do. So there could be this collision, and it could end up in the courts, but we don't have a lot of time. Alabama has already gone through this, and they drew 6 white majority districts and 1 Republican district, and a 3-judge panel said, go back, can't do it, doesn't work, it's not fair, got to do it a different way. So Alabama will likely have to do that. And of course, this could wind all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, as it did when Cleo Fields was a congressman, but he'd already served 2 terms when they threw out his district. Remember, it went from Shreveport to Baton Rouge and carved out every African-American hamlet along the way, and he had a black majority district, and he won a couple of terms in Congress. But Cleo Fields is in the legislature now. He's a big voice at the table on this. He was with me on the radio yesterday, and he has drawn a district, and I looked at it today, and it is a second black majority district, and basically the person it hurts most is Julia Letlow, because it takes North Louisiana and comes down and grabs North Baton Rouge. And you can do it that way, but Lafayette is not carved up. Shreveport's not carved up. New Orleans is not carved up, but here we're splitting Baton Rouge again. And we've done that this time around in a clearly gerrymandered district that would have been thrown out if somebody had challenged it, where Cedric Richmond and now Troy Carter represent the city of New Orleans and North Baton Rouge. And Baton Rouge now has 870,000 citizens. 870,000. It's big enough as far as the metro area. Big enough to have its own congressional district and not be carved up. But in order to get those 2 majority black districts, that's pretty much how it's done. And we'll see what happens. But it's going to be a battle royal. And we've been down this road before. I remember in 1990, James David Kane, the flamboyant senator from Dry Creek, he had a 14-hour filibuster protesting the lines that were drawn. He claimed he didn't wear a diaper, but I have my doubts. But he spoke consecutively for 14 hours, and he wasn't stopped because he had to go to the bathroom. He was stopped because he got delirious. He had talked consecutively for 14 hours, and at the end he was talking about Romer's goat. I don't even know if Romer had a goat, but James David Kane was talking about it. They said, it's time to give up the ghost, Senator, and he sat down, and some districts were drawn and then ultimately thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court. But it will be a showdown, and they only have 20 days to do it, and they got to do all these other things. And the governor is the key player, and he's under fire right now. But the governor's key constituency is the African-American base and black lawmakers. That basically is his party. Of the 33 Democrats in the House, 24 of them are in the Black Caucus, and there would be a 25th, but Ted James just left. And of the 12 senators who are Democrats, 10 of the 12 are in the Black Caucus. So the governor is going to side with his party, and he owes his election to black voters. He barely beat Eddie Rispone in 2019, and he won by 40,000 votes. And he won by more than 50,000 in Baton Rouge, and he won by more than 100,000 in New Orleans. And that's indicative of the fact that he knows who brought him to the dance. And he says, I think he's got a point that it's fairness, but you could make the same case about the Bessie board. 2 out of 11 seats are majority black. The Public Service Commission, 1 out of 5. The Supreme Court, 1 out of 7. So they have some other cases to be made. And the point I would make about Baton Rouge potentially having its own district and how this could change the world. By the way, the governor, I don't think he would mind me saying this. I do this radio show with me, and he early on had some dust-ups with Garrett Graves, but he's commented that Congressman Graves is a hard worker and has his heart in the right place, and he's got no quarrel with Garrett Graves. But Graves would be affected by this if Baton Rouge were redrawn, and this is why. In 2014, when he defeated the erstwhile Edwin Edwards in Edwin Edwards' last dance, Edwards was running 87-year-old convicted felon running against Garrett Graves, who had never run for office before, but was well known for his coastal work, and he worked for some other people, David Vitter and Billy Tozan. He had experience, he was qualified. And in Baton Rouge, Graves beat Edwards 61 to 43,000, 18,000 votes. But there were 28,000 votes cast in that election in North Baton Rouge. And think about that. And not one of those 28,000, to be precise, 27,671, not one of them went to a Republican. So if the city of Baton Rouge had just been included as its own district, quite possibly Edwin Edwards would have been elected to Congress in the year of 2014, not Garrett Graves. But Graves won by 45,000 votes because he cleaned up in Livingston and in Ascension, which are now Republican strongholds. And so the way those districts are drawn make a big difference. Graves is strong enough now that he might be able to, and I think he probably would be able to withstand the same lines that I'm talking about. He couldn't have in 2014, but he could now. But if he leaves, then what happens? And he may very well move on to something else. If Cassidy were elected governor, I would think Graves would be a strong bet to be appointed by Cassidy to be the next U.S. senator. So things like that are always in play. There are rumors right now that John Bell Edwards is perhaps under review for a cabinet position, despite the problems of the last few weeks. And that would make sense, and he has said he would be open to considering any offer made by the President of the United States. He's a military guy, he salutes the flag, and this is the commander-in-chief. But the most delicious prospect, don't think it'll happen, but if it does, you heard it here first, would be that President Biden has said that he wants a black female to be on the Supreme Court. Long overdue, and there are 3 or 4 candidates who have been mentioned prominently, but one of those that really hasn't been mentioned, who he could appoint to the Supreme Court if she were accepting, would be the Vice President, Kamala Harris. And she would certainly be qualified. She was Attorney General of California. And then he would be able to appoint a new VP, and wouldn't it be something if it were John Bell Edwards? Who would balance the ticket well, Southern Democrat, pro-life, pro-gun. It'd be a brilliant political move, but it's not likely to happen. But if it does happen, I'm taking credit for it. But it's those kinds of things which make covering politics, particularly in Louisiana, very interesting, and sports as well. A few things happening in the sporting realm as well. And I've been fortunate enough to do this for a long while, and I don't think I would have had the staying power if I'd done it in another state. And since it's 2/2/22, I'll always remember where I spoke on Groundhog Day, 2/2/22. And the next Wednesday that matches up like that is 5/5/55, so I hope you'll invite me back in 33 years. And Brian will introduce me again, and we'll both still be in the game. But it is an honor and a pleasure not only to be with you today, but be a member of your group. And let's keep going, and let's do our best to make our city, a better place. So God bless you. Thank you. And I don't know, do we have any time? We have time? So if you have, yes? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks for being here. One of the questions I had, I didn't know if redistricting would affect, the city of St. George, that particular initiative that's being held up in court now, but if you could speak on that.
Well, that's 86,000 people that, it's an unincorporated area of Baton Rouge. And if you look at Baton Rouge, the city population is not even in the top 100 in the country. And one of the reasons is that you got 86,000, and there's some other unincorporated areas as well. But East Baton Rouge Parish would still be ruled by the mayor-president, whoever that is, and right now it's Sharon Weston Broome. And a point that ties in a bit with what you're talking about is that Baton Rouge, our black population is 46.1%, but we've elected a black mayor 5 times in a row. And I don't think it's not always necessary to have a black majority to elect a black person. And in the Louisiana legislature right now, there are 3 House members who are white serving in majority black districts. So I think the big thing is to make it competitive. And one thing it would do, for example, if Garrett Graves were in a more competitive district, he would have to listen to the other side a bit more. And the same is true of Troy Carter. If he were in a district that wasn't a laydown, he'd have to listen to the other side. And this is a phenomenon all over the country right now, that these districts are drawn and the other side doesn't have to even pay attention to the competing party. And we're talking about 2 parties. They're more concerned about being primaried, about being defeated within their own party. Right now, John Kennedy's running for the U.S. Senate, and he's raised $11 million, and the election is November 8th, and his opponent's Luke Mixon's got 200,000, and Gary Chambers has less than that. The way to beat Kennedy isn't to put in a bunch of Democrats. The way to beat him is to get some Republicans in the race. And right now, there are no Republicans. So I think John Kennedy is on cruise control to winning another term when he will be 71 years old. By the way, the oldest U.S. senator we've had since Allen Ellender croaked in office in 1972. Certainly, we don't wish that on our junior senator. Lloyd?
What's prospects for a bridge, a new bridge?
For a new bridge? Well, we've got infrastructure money. The governor's put aside $500 million. He wants to get it a start, and I think it'll happen. But I don't know. I may speak at the Rotary Club in 2055 before we still call the Horace Wilkinson Bridge the new bridge. It was built in 1971. We didn't have a big 50-year celebration last year for the Horace Wilkinson Bridge. But, there's a beautiful bridge over St. Francisville, and I know some of you are from that area, but I think only 3,000 or 4,000 people a day travel that. Why wasn't that bridge built a little closer to where the action is? But I think it'll happen, but it's a very expensive proposition, and it's fraught with a lot of political intrigue. And it may take some time. And even if they got full-fledged approval, you just don't build a bridge overnight. But eventually it'll happen. And by then our city will probably have twice as many people and we'll have the same problems. So I don't know that anybody in this room will ever see a day when Baton Rouge doesn't have traffic woes. Yes, sir?
How is the governor going to wriggle past this green thing?
Ronald Green? Well, I don't know that he would say it's wriggling past. I doubt very seriously. I don't think he obstructed justice, and I don't think that he did anything that is culpable in a court of law, but he didn't get in front of this, and this is his first unforced error as governor. And he's playing a bad hand with 95 members of the opposition party out to bring him down. But on the other hand, and I like our governor. I'm especially appreciative that he chose our show, Paul Barber, to announce his candidacy in 2013, inadvertently, but he did it on our radio show. But that text message that he got in May of 2019, he is the consummate delegator. He's a military guy. He lets his people do their things. He governs like a general, but I think most people who got a text message like that would have followed up and gotten down in the weeds and tried to get to the bottom of what was going on. But he didn't do that. And yesterday, I thought the questions were good. And I'll say this too, is that now there are so few media people. When I started covering Governor Edwards, there were 25 media people around him all the time. And he went through what this Governor Edwards did every day. And he loved it. And he was good at it. But now sometimes when somebody at a press conference, I see this in sports too, if they ask a tough question, all the media people are looking at it like, what got into John Burke over there? But I think that a good question would have been, what would you do differently? And nobody asked that question because he was on the defensive the whole time, and he made a good case for he didn't do anything criminal, and I don't think he did. And he didn't intentionally cover up anything. But sometimes there are sins of omission as there are sins of commission, and I think he would acknowledge he could have done more. And he didn't. And he's going to have to live with the consequences. And he's a big boy. I'm sure he can take it. Martin?
What was Moose Scourin's lifetime batting average?
Did you look it up?
You know it.
No, that was, I'm old, but I'm not that old. But Moose Scourin was not, he wasn't Mickey Mantle or Roger Maris' lifetime batting average was only in the 260s, by the way. But Moose Scourin's probably in that range, but he didn't have Maris's power. But I do know that Donald Trump, he said in 1962, he was the best baseball player in New York City. And, he was at the New York Military Academy at that time. And somebody looked it up, he batted 130. But there were some guys in New York then named Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, Whitey Ford. I think I would take them over our former president. But he was a strapping young man as a youngster, and I'm sure he could hit the ball when he made contact. He just didn't make contact that often. Thank you. Thank you very much. Love you.